We used to get the Saturday. What, the janitor stuff?
Okay.
You can pick up for free. You can pick it up for free in Mount Sinai Hospital.
Okay.
Also at the near at the
what's it called?
They press the terrace.
The terrace.
Oh,
and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to go too. I haven't
Decision. The topic tonight is circling the wagons. It seems that whenever people raise the idea of listening to the other side, it's interpreted by many people as open yourself to change your opinion. In other words, it's sort of like a person says, you should hear the other side. It becomes this perception that you should hear and change your opinion. And that's not really what listening to the other side is about. When Beit Hillel used to quote Beit Shammai first, it's not because they agreed with Beit Shammai. It was the perception that knowing what your opponent is thinking, even as you maintain your position, is a worthwhile attribute. In knowing how, in knowing what your opponent's arguments are, where they're thinking, and so forth, it actually is beneficial to your viewpoint. Beneficial because it expands your viewpoint, it sharpens your viewpoint, it can affect your viewpoint, it can affect it in a way where you see the greater complexity of the viewpoint. But it also gives you a perspective that allows you to get a greater breadth of the situation and really allows you to fully understand your own viewpoint. So in many ways, the way of the world today is to circle the wagons. I'm right, you're wrong. And basically I hang around with people who share my opinions. The other group hang around with people who share their opinions. They don't know how to communicate with each other, and therefore this is what's right. And anyone coming from the other side basically doesn't develop any idea of how we get across the argument, how we develop it, and so forth. The benefit of hearing the other side is not simply because they might change your opinion, but it's a matter, as I said, of extending your understanding. Because maybe they'll say something that'll make you think about your ideas, maybe freshen your ideas, maybe see a greater perspective, and so forth. Let me give an example of what I mean. In terms of understanding a greater perspective on a situation and how it can affect the way you're thinking. In the Middle Ages, Christians used to break into Jewish homes and basically take the children, try baptizing them, right? Okay? There's no freedom of religion, and of course, and so forth and so forth, and they were basically, they basically kidnapped the kids, put them in a monastery somewhere, and basically said, we're going to raise them as good Christians. Now, how do you understand that act? So the simple understanding of it is that it's an act of it's a cruel act of evil and so forth. It's people taking kids and so forth and so forth. But to really understand the act and really understand the theory of this kidnapping, you have to look at it from a different perspective. What were these people thinking? What do you think their motivation was? Now that doesn't justify it, but the idea being to extend the idea. So, what were these people thinking?
Act of kindness.
An act of kindness. So we look at it. You say that somewhat. What do you call it? Sarcastically, so forth and so forth. So let me give you another example from our modern world. Okay, when you have individuals who will not allow blood transfusion for their children, right? What does the government do? What happens in those situations? They take the children and give blood transfusions, right? Now why? Because the children would die if you don't give the blood transfusions. Therefore, we look at that act as an act of kindness, right? And what do you expect a good person to do, and so forth. The fact is, though, is that to understand that act would be very, very similar to how someone in the 1300s would look upon taking a Jewish child and baptizing that child. And you have to think about it. You would do it to save a life, that child's life, right? Okay? In the 1300s, what was their argument?
Saving their soul from
right. Okay, their eternal life, right? We're not just worried about their temporal life here. We're worried about their eternal life.
Okay,
Now, what happens is, though, is this now opens up an interesting perspective. Now, you're going to say?
Well, I get how you're no worse off for knowing what the other person's thinking, but there's no resolution. There's no refining of my argument that someone took my kids and
There's no middle ground.
they may have done it exactly. There's no compromise that's possible. So it seems like it's the classic two-slit experiment, right? That in hindsight you just interpret that was evil or that was good.
Or
you view the world a certain way and you snap a wave into a part.
Yeah, but there's a difference when you're arguing with someone. See,
How so? One's going to say you're evil.
I think.
One's going to say no, I'm kind.
Yeah, but there's not aspect of understanding. Like let me take this to like, one of the things that always got me in the whole argument nowadays in terms of radical Islam and jihadists and so forth, and the argument to not call radical Islam, right? Now, the reason for that argument was because people would not make a distinction between radical jihadist Islam and other forms of Islam. Islam is a multi-dimensional religion. There are people who practice Islam different ways and so forth and so forth. So the concern was you would not make a distinction between this person and that person, even though there were Muslims who also were being killed by ISIS, right? The Jordanian...
I don't think that was the reason.
What?
I think the reason that people like Obama didn't want to use the term radical Islam and Hillary Clinton was because they live in a world where all religions are equally problematic.
Right.
And so to examine something close enough to be able to say, well, we've got an issue with this one group of people that we don't have with this other group of people. They don't want to do that. They want to live in a world where all religions are equally problematic.
No, I think it's interesting because you're getting into an interesting argument about the nature of religion. Religion, in freedom of religion is supposed to be, or the easiest way to understand freedom of religion is when freedom of religion basically means all the religions basically believe the exact same thing, motherhood and apple pie, and the only difference is how you want to practice your spirituality. Some people want to do it this way, some people want to do it that way. I once spoke, I'm sure I told you guys, happened was that when Rabbi Skobek was Hill director many, many years ago, there was a Christian group on campus at one of the colleges, one of the divinity colleges at U of T, who kept wanting to do a program with a rabbi. So Rabbi Skobek asked me if I would do it. So it was a professor from the divinity school, and myself, and our discussion was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Anyways, it was an interesting discussion because I think I've told you guys this before. when the whole question came up of original sin and so forth, I remember speaking to the guy who I later found out was the guy who actually put together the whole program, who was a divinity student. I looked at him and said, "You do recognize that the word sin is not found in the entire story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The first time you come across the word Hecht is by Cain and Hevel. The word sin is not found there." And this guy's looking at me, what? So he looks to the prof, the divinity school prof. He says, "Is that true, sir?" And he just matter-of-factly says, "Yes, of course it is. The word sin is not found. Original sin is a Paulist interpretation of the text." And so like, it's a matter-of-factly, This guy, I just felt I just pulled the rug out from his... Anyways, at the end of the evening, they wanted to give me something to thank me for coming. So they gave me this interfaith calendar. And what it was basically the same picture with minor changes. Actually, the people in the picture also were changed and so forth. But what it was a family, husband, wife, and kids, and so forth, all doing something religious. Okay, for Jews, it was around the candle lighting of the Shabbos candle lighting, which I never saw. Shabbos candle lighting that, usually around Shabbos candle lighting, it's usually everyone's yelling, "Get ready for Shabbos," and so forth and so forth. This one had the wife and the husband all nicely, actually, since I've gone to a house where they actually had a really nice, everyone sat around and saw the candle light. So I'd never seen this before. Okay, then they had the Christians around the Christmas tree, and Buddhists around the little Buddhas and stuff like that. So anyways, but it was all basically the same thing. Motherhood now applied, families. That's the thing between religion. Religion's supposed to be, we're all in it together, right? So when you have religions who start saying, if you don't practice my way, I'm going to kill you, then you have to deal with what religions are really all about. What religions are about is the way the religions were in the Middle Ages. We'll kill you, and this is that, and this is that. I mean, the fact is that if you believe in A and the other guy doesn't believe in you, then that's pretty bad. If you believe the person's going to be eternally damned by not believing a certain thing, that guy must be a pretty bad person. Anyways, but my that's what I'm having. But what I'm saying is in our world today, people generally understand that to save someone's life, of course, you override the religion. Well, in the 1300s, you save someone's soul, you're going to arrive at it. Now, how does that change the way they relate to the person? Well, you're going to understand you disagree. You're going to understand I'm not going to go for that. But you're not going to put him in the same category as someone who is basically just into murdering and raping. And that's what I thought was the problem in terms of this whole issue. No one's talking about actually how to deal with radical Islam and jihadist Islam. What happens is if you don't talk about it as religion, then they become thugs like any other thug. So what happens is these people who basically are doing these acts, but motivated by a different reason, they're put in the same categories with any hoodlum who would rape and murder and steal for their own personal gain and whatever. And to me, you're missing the point. Now, the reason that makes a distinction is that if you want to take action against a person who is a thug or hoodlum, right? So if you get across to him, there'll be consequences for his behavior that he won't like, then he'll stop doing it. So the truth is that if you are basically around people who are thugs, and you basically simply punish a few of the thugs and get across to them that you keep doing this, you're going to end up in jail or worse, then the person sits there and says, gee whiz, I better not do that because I can have a consequence. But if you're a religious person who's basically arguing like this, right, that won't work because you believe that this is the right thing to do, and so forth. That's that's what I always felt with the argument. They always compared, when they didn't go to the religious route, they always compared ISIS to a bunch of raiding marauders, and they didn't.
They had a different agenda when they did that.
Yeah, but I think the reason that they wouldn't is very similar, is very analogous to why they're dead set against racial profiling.
Yeah.
Because by racial profiling, even though racial profiling works, you unfortunately are going to inconvenience people who just happen to be of that race or that specific group. And by calling radical Islam for what it actually is, now you're doing the exact same to some of the Islamic groups who
And the fact is this is where things become much more complicated. And this is what usually happens when you start seeing the other side and what the other side's argument is about. You see, the way I started this off was when you argue between two sides, then you're going to read into the other side the way you want to read into them. Okay? So the way I started this off is, if you're on this side and you're talking about the other side, and the other side is basically, in the case I'm arguing, is thugs. If you now bring in the issue, which makes this comparable to the issue with blood transfusion and so forth, then you're dealing with people who are thinking very differently. But all I'm trying to say is that opens up the possibility of seeing things differently and coming up with different perspectives, and also dealing with the complexity. That you have a greater complexity because of the situation. These are thugs is a much easier answer.
But there's two different scenarios. One is a scenario where there's a disagreement between 2 points of view and a compromise is possible. And another is where there's a disagreement between two groups of people and a compromise is impossible.
Yes.
So if my neighbor, God forbid, came and kidnapped my children and he won't tell me where they are, whether it's because he's a thug or a sadist or a pedophile or got some kind of weird religious perspective, I don't care. Whatever his pathology is, from my perspective, I don't really care, because I'm not going to be able to have a compromise with him. It may be useful in a practical sense to figure out what his motivations are so that I can get my kids back. But there's no compromise that's possible.
Okay, and what I'm saying is, it's interesting you bring that up, because that's part of my argument when I apply Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The idea of having dialogue is not just a matter of compromise, even though that might be a legitimate objective, in the sense that when you have dialogue, you basically might be able to say, "Hey, I'll get a new idea out of it." Okay, I have this perspective, you have that perspective. Because you've introduced that perspective, maybe will get me to start thinking of a synthesis, and we'll both come up with a solution that will meet both our objectives.
For example, if Obama would have said, "Listen, obviously not all Muslims are radical Islamists, but certainly there's an element of Islam that is coercing or taking a subset of people and causing them to do horrible things," and then was able to sit down with Muslims and say, "Okay, let's talk about this. Let's recognize there's a problem," instead of just covering his eyes and saying, "Listen, it's got nothing to do with Islam."
Okay.
Then you just can't get it.
He invited them to the White House, the Muslim Brotherhood. So
Right.
Not only did he not do that,
So,
Yeah.
But the point is that's my argument, in the sense that if you're able to perceive what's going on and see the other side, then what I'm saying is the synthesis or the compromise is not the only solution. What happened with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is Beis Hillel still stood by their position, but they had a better understanding of the issues and a better understanding of what their position necessitated.
It's a qualitatively different scenario, because there's a respect between these two groups. There's ultimately a shared goal between these two groups of people.
You're right. The fact is I didn't mention this in my articles. The fact is the Pharisees, the Perushim, did not have the same respect for the Saddukim, for the Sadducees. Okay, there's positions where there are positions that are outside the pale that you have to that basically you can't really even have this type of dialogue. There's different forms of disagreement. There's certain people you disagree with where you're able to have respectful dialogue. I'm not saying this is a universal thing with every person. Whenever I argue, knowing the other side, I'm always concerned. Someone sits there and says, "Oh, so you're going to start having an argument the way the Nazis have their argument." No, I'm not. But I'll tell you one thing: trying to understand what the Nazis thought is important for me to know how to deal with them. Now, this is okay. Yeah. So therefore, that's the next step. What I'm saying is, and this is an issue. Circling the wagons, okay, it basically means I don't have any perception of what the other person is thinking, is a problem. But then it comes about what are the benefits of actually thinking through things. So one of the ultimate benefits is you might be able to come to some synthesis in an answer that actually, by having dialogue, you're able to expand the answer and actually come up with a better idea. Okay, because that's and I don't want to think in terms of anything practical, in terms of Obama, Trump, or that. I'm just thinking in general, in theory. One other possibility is by understanding the other side, you get a better perspective of various different reasons why people do things, which may then lead to practical ways of responding to it. Okay?
But isn't it also, I think that the value of the dialogue, I think we're strictly focusing on it as being one of the parties involved in the dialogue, but ultimately isn't the most important part about having the dialogue, which is the reason why there's such a mess in the United States now and society's crumbling because of the lack of dialogue, is that the dialogue is not for the two people involved in the dialogue, it's for everybody who's watching the dialogue. In other words, if you believe strongly enough in your position and your case, being just willing to get into the dialogue allows others to basically be able to have an opinion or develop knowledge.
Okay, so that leads to the next thing, and that is the ability to dialogue. You see, what I'm starting with is the ability to see the other side. And the reason I started with that example was, with the example in terms of Christians who kidnap Jewish children, is that, what really is their argument? What then is the legitimate argument against it? How do you deal with it? If you deal with them as thugs, they don't see themselves as thugs. If you deal with them as believers in a certain religion, then maybe you might be able to challenge their religious beliefs. Well, how do you know you're right, and so forth? Then they might be dogmatists. There may not be a practical a solution in certain levels, but there might be something to consider into the future of in a long term to do it. But one of the things that exists when you see this sort of like entrenching is the inability to dialogue. To dialogue, you have to have some perception of how to talk to another. Now, on the simplest level, if I speak English and the other person speaks Swahili, we can't dialogue, right? We have to have some kind of common language. Even if we're both speaking English, we also have to have some aspect of a common language. And we also have some aspect of a common ability, a common understanding of some values.
Common courtesy.
Okay, or you see, I'm not even thinking just in terms of courtesy. I'm thinking in terms of further understanding of where you're coming from. What are your values? What are your perspectives? If you don't think that there's any value in private property, then me going up to you and saying, that guy's stealing. So, I don't think there's anything wrong. In other words, we have so many connotations in all our words. And therefore, one of the things that always hits me is knowing how to discuss things with another person, and how to look into the way they're thinking. Yeah.
So I think there's another problem, and that is your you're making an assumption that the two people or 2 points of view will represent themselves honestly, and that they share certain things that are essential for dialogue. You talk about language is obviously one of them, but in postmodernism, there's not an agreement that there is a universal truth.
Yeah,
So you can't have an argument with a postmodernist person because you can prove this, that, the other thing beyond doubt, and then they'll just come and say, "That's in your universe. In my universe, the facts are in a different direction."
okay,
And logic, in and of itself, is suspect.
and what you're doing is developing. You're uncovering the issues.
There's a second issue, though, and that is you find that a lot of people are not honest about what their real agenda is. So, for example, in Toronto, there's this issue of whether to allow jets to land at the island airport.
Yeah.
And so there's two sides, and they're arguing about it, and the amount of noise, and this and that. And then a new piece of information is thrown into the discussion, and that is there's an invention of a whisper jet so that the noise of the new jets is going to be less than what was discussed before, and maybe even less than propeller planes. And then it turns out that wasn't really the motivation at all. That the side that was against the jets coming in was against it for a completely different reason.
Right.
So you can't really have dialogue
Okay.
with people if they're not going to if they're going to misrepresent their own motivation.
You're okay. So what you're what you're saying is that, again, let's go back to this model of two groups circling the wagons. If there's going to be some kind of dialogue between them, there has to be some honesty in that dialogue or whatever. That honesty in the dialogue has to see some purpose to that perspective. The person who's arguing your example with the jets is they have an agenda. They don't want jets on that island. They don't want the airport island to be so busy. Whatever. Okay. Therefore, and then they gave the argument about the jets because that's the easiest argument to make. And everyone will understand that because it's jets. So what you're saying is, I want to understand that and so forth. But then comes about that when that argument is in, you find out there's another argument and so forth. So obviously, in all these things, you have to be able to honestly dialogue. So if you notice my second article that we're talking about, when we talk about freedom of speech, it's being able to express your opinion to the others, so the other one hears, and being to really understand and being able to listen to you understand what the other point is. Now, this obviously takes honesty and so forth. What I'm getting at is that in terms of thing, and obviously the example of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are two groups who are honestly interested in coming up with the ideas. But what I'm trying to develop is obviously in an atmosphere where people are being legitimate and honest in their discussion and so forth and so forth. The perception of you having an argument with someone else does not necessarily mean that your objective is to win. Your objective is to understand. And understanding is a much broader perspective. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily are going to win. You may stand by your idea, but you understand what you are really standing for. So in this situation, now that the people came out and said, we don't want jets on the island, even if they're not going to make noise. So those people who do want the jets on the island, what's their reason for wanting the jets on the island? Convenience, whatever.
Their reason was the reason that they stated at the beginning.
Okay, so their reason was the same.
Yeah.
But now their reason becomes more. Their reason becomes, well, that's the reason I always said. But the truth is now what you're seeing is those people who are against the jets, it's an aspect of their lifestyle. They feel there'll be an increase in traffic because more people will be coming down to the island. Right? And therefore their argument is their own convenience, which they did not say before, because they thought the other argument would be able to override that argument. Now you begin to understand where they're really coming from. Now, the point is you're talking about a situation where they're not being honest in the first place. What I'm saying is a lot of times the situation I'm trying to deal with is trying to understand what their argument is and all the different connotations to that argument. Let me give you another example. Let's take the aspect of belief. Okay? So, if you have an argument, and let's say in terms of belief in God and so forth, then you'll see a person saying, you're right, it's not logic, it's belief. And belief is the next step beyond logic, and I just believe. Okay? So that's just belief. Okay? And you can't challenge it. Well, if that's true, then what about the next step in terms of belief? That belief says if you don't have that belief, you're going to be punished for it. So what is it? So this belief is no longer just something you have. There has to be something that makes it that you are punishable if you don't have that belief. Now that argument I always find interesting, in the sense that because I don't have this emotional understanding of the truth, right? Somehow I am culpable for that, not having that belief. Now, presented for many years by missionaries, that fear got people to start believing in Christianity, because the missionaries basically said, you're going to hell if you don't believe this. So they said, boy, I better be afraid of it, and so forth and so forth. But the fact is the absence of that feeling, why should I be held culpable for it? Okay? Now, what most people don't recognize is what's Judaism's attitude towards this. That's why I always get upset when anyone gives that argument in terms of Judaism. In Judaism, people try and give the argument that free choice can't be proven. You can't prove the existence of God. Because if God's existence was absolutely provable through logic, right, you would not have free choice. Free choice has to have some element of, I don't know. Right? Now, what's the problem with that argument? That's a good argument for belief. You can't prove it, therefore it has to be some kind of thing that you can't prove it, but somehow you're culpable if you don't have it. If you're not able to prove something, or if you don't have this belief, are you culpable within Judaism?
No.
How do you know that? Because what?
Doesn't he just get his points or no?
He doesn't have much.
God gives out half marks. No. God gives out half marks. Over here it's just wrong. No. Okay. The law of Tinuk Nishma. The law of someone who's not held accountable for if they didn't know. The point is the concept of Tinuk Nishma has been expanded. In many ways, there are many rabbis today who say that basically anyone who is not observant, most likely is a Tinuk Nishma.
Can you say that a little slower?
Okay, Tinuk Nishma, a child who has been captured. Nishba. Who's been
Nishba is captured?
Yeah. Okay, from Shvuya, okay, of being in capture, Shevi and stuff like that. So the point is that if you are captured, okay, and not brought up within ideas and so forth, the fact is that you can't, you basically are not held accountable. So basically, because how do you know this is right? How do you know it's true? Now, that leads into interesting issues. So now it creates an interesting question in terms of free choice. Okay, so what is free? So therefore, if you can't prove it, then person can't really be held culpable, it would seem. Although, I'm not talking in terms of God, because God has some knowledge that we don't have. So he knows what a person is really thinking and so forth. But that's why the Jewish perception of free choice, when I read these articles that talk about free choice and talk about it as that's why it can't be proven in belief and so forth, basically say that's a problem. Because Jewish thought doesn't exist, it doesn't work on that. So what does that mean? It means free choice exists when you're absolutely sure of what happens, of the truth. In other words, when was there free choice? In Sinai. Okay, like for example, the Chazon Ish says, without any open miracles, right, you have a real problem with free choice. You have a real problem with defining, I should say, you have a real problem with his actual name is, you have a real problem with defining someone as a heretic without absolute miracles. Because absolute miracles prove the existence of God, and the absence of absolute miracles does not prove the existence of God. So when you have free choice, you have free choice where the existence of God and the fact that He gave these laws is absolutely clear. Okay? So therefore, I know now free choice becomes a very interesting idea. I know God said not to eat that ham sandwich, right? I know the consequences of eating that ham sandwich. Free choice is I'm still going to eat that ham sandwich. Now you got a new problem. What's your new problem? Let me understand this. God tells me not to eat the ham sandwich. I know the consequences of eating the ham sandwich. And when I eat the ham sandwich?
Because you're only a dummy with you.
Okay, so then you have a new problem. What kind of free choice is that? What idiot would make that free choice? Right? Okay, now the truth is there are certain individuals in Jewish history that seem to have made that kind of free choice. Okay? And they weren't idiots. Right? There were people who knew it and said, well, I'm going to do this anyways.
Is there a line that God protects the fools?
Fools, yes. Shem Simon Hashem, that's right. So these people were really they're really fools. But you want to give me some names of some people who knew exactly that there was a God, knew exactly it was wrong to do something, and they still did it. Korach. Yeravim, the first king of Israel. Esav. I mean, you can go through certain people. They had no doubt of God's existence. Right? Well, Yonah is an interesting example. But Yonah is a little bit more complicated because his decision, God didn't. He was still figuring out. He had a logical reason for, disobeying and so forth. So, but he knew it was an order. But he thought, something. I'm not going to do it. And then God sort of said, "Yeah, I understand why you didn't do it." So.
What about Balaam?
Yeah, Balaam's a perfect example. Now, why would these people know this? Now you have a bigger problem. This is why people don't like free choice. If it's absolutely clear, why would you know it? So then what is really free choice? Why would a person, basically knowing full well the consequences...
No free choice in anything except the fear of God. Isn't that right?
Yes. Okay? But the fact is what does that mean? Why would a person...
It's a decision as to whether you want to perceive the world in this way or that way.
No, you're not perceiving the world. The world you already recognize. There's a God. Okay, He told me to do this and this and this, and I'm not going to do it. Why would a person knowing full well that there are pretty bad consequences if I don't do it? Why would someone do that?
Children do that all the time.
They don't really think. Yeah. So they're saying they're children? They're saying they're children?
Into the bonus round.
Because the fact is the child doesn't really believe in those consequences. Because the parent can always be, oh, come on, Daddy. Come on, Mommy. Right? How many times have you showed mercy? Okay.
Now's not a good time to talk.
Okay. Now, the truth is that there are people who have that argument with God also. There's an idea of, well, He's merciful. Don't worry, He'll.
So you're talking about a pretty important psychological principle. Then.
Yes. Now, notice how we got to this interesting psychological principle. The fact is what I'm getting at is I'm got here because I'm trying to see the other side. In other words, what I'm trying to say is your point is people have dialogue in order to work out something. Compromise. If you can't figure it out, the dialogue and so forth and so forth. But the fact is dialogue opens up other possibilities, other ideas. Okay, now, why is it that a person will say no to God?
Seems like it must be an issue of faith at that moment.
The faith goes back to belief.
I know, but like people,
But you're going back.
But people drift in and out of that.
So therefore, you're going back to the emotion,
Right.
since it's not absolutely clear and provable. Therefore, there's So therefore,
If God was like
maybe
300 feet and standing over your shoulder every 2 seconds, you would, like if you're at Sinai constantly, nobody's going to make that other choice.
that's the argument.
But Moshe
Yeah,
Rabbeinu,
That's the argument.
but Moshe
That-
Rabbeinu is standing. God is right in front of him and is telling him to do things, and he's arguing with him.
Arguing is different. Moshe doesn't say no. The fact is now the truth is maybe you'll make a mistake in logic, like you said beforehand. You think there's a logical argument like this, or your example from Yonah, and so forth and so forth. But the true definition of evil is a person who basically says, "No, God said no." Okay, and I know that there's going to be tremendous consequences for doing this act, but I'm still going to do it. Now, what kind of free choice is that? Okay? So that free choice comes from the autonomy principle in the human being, where the human being basically says, no one's going to tell me what to do, even if it's God. And the fact is where does that principle actually come from? But the idea of what in the human being makes the human being feel that he has autonomy? Because he's made in the image of God. So the fact is that which makes you in the image of God actually can be the force that makes you say, I'm not going to listen to God. Because I don't want God. Because the idea of being godly says, I want to be in charge. And therefore the greatest Rishayim basically said, Yeravam ben Nevat, was talked about it, he basically said, no one's going to tell me what to do.
It's exactly like children.
Mm-hmm. You're not the boss of me.
Right? The fact is but that principle is a very important principle in the child, because that's what develops autonomy, and that develops your own ability to be a person. But the fact is this creates a greater tension and understanding of what life is about, right? If you God wants us also to have this sense of godliness, which is the ability to say, I am responsible. I am someone who can take some responsibility. The fact is that when you understand it, you understand that this creates a greater tension in terms of what free choice is about. But the point is you get to this understanding when you begin to understand the other sides. See, what happens is, or what I'm really getting at, and I guess this is where I started with the example of blood transfusions and so forth, is no one who does evil ever believes that they're doing evil. Okay, we have a principle. We have a principle in Jewish law called Ein Adam Atzmo, Ein Adam Osa Atzmo. What's that? Ein Adam Osa Atzma. I should know this. Ein Adam Osa Atzmo Rasha. That no person perceives himself to be evil. That's why in Jewish law you have a remarkable concept. A person, what do you call it? Confession, self-confession is unacceptable in Jewish court, right? I walk into a court and say, "Hey, I just ate a ham sandwich." Court doesn't do anything because there's no confession. Okay, I come in and say, I just murdered someone. Theoretically, the court can't do anything because self-confession does not have status in Jewish law. A person that person cannot be a witness because Ein Adam because Adam Karovetz Alatzmo, because a person is always a relative to himself. So in Jewish law, relatives can't be witnesses. So theoretically, you can't be a witness to yourself. Okay, but the point is that we have other principles that, like in financial statements, I can go up to someone and say, I owe the guy $100, and that will have status in Jewish law because you can create your own obligations. But in Jewish law, I can't accept the fact that I did a crime. Now, the truth is that if you walked in and said, I killed someone, and there was reason to believe that you were telling the truth, the court's not going to let you just walk out and say, oh, okay, go home. Right? There were things in Jewish law that protected society and law and order. So when it came to crimes that actually would affect law and order, the Jewish court had much broader perspectives. But the point is that Ein Adam Osim Atzmo Rasha, a person cannot make himself evil. That basically means a person always has a justification for what he does.
Is that why the SS guys, the high guys who were caught in Nuremberg cried when they were about to be hanged?
They always thought they were right. I mean, they all, but every one of them thought that's the perception that these evildoers basically say, "Oh yeah, I know I'm doing evil. Yeah, but I had a good time while I'm doing it." That's the way we like to think about evildoers. Like Dr. Evil and everyone like that. But people who do evil generally have some justification for it. We're doing a good thing. Okay. The fact is that's why when they had that film about Hitler, Machshmo, and there was real concerns that they're going to present him as a psychological profile. And once you go into psychology, you begin to understand him. And Nebuch, the poor guy, he had a hangnail when he was 32, something like that. So therefore, I'm sure he should make a joke about this. But the fact is, we begin to have a little bit of empathy for him. The fact of the matter is Rishayim all think they're doing the greatest thing. Stalin thought he was, the savior of Russia. These people all think they're doing the greatest thing. It's
That's actually Jordan Peterson's part of his. I mean, at least what I get from it, he's focused on showing that the scary thing about the Germans and the Nazis was simply that anybody is that close to being able to do the exact same thing. In other words, it's not that there was that there were monsters out of nowhere, and it's that really society is such that things could be put in place where anyone could.
And the fact is that's why people like to entrench. It's a further reason we like to entrench, because we want to see the opponent as basically being totally black and evil, right? We want the opponent to be totally black and evil. Okay, but the point is when you understand. Now, this doesn't justify it. The problem when you get into these arguments is that people think you're basically justifying it. You're not justifying it. What you're doing is basically trying to understand it, understanding the real motivation, and knowing how to deal with it.
I still think there's two qualitatively different scenarios. One is where your opponent has shared goals, and another where your opponent has goals in mind that are diametrically opposed to yours. And will do whatever it takes to win.
So what you're
the more you empathize with the other side,
you're not empathizing. That's what I'm saying. What you're defining is you are trying to understand the other side. Now, it might be
some guy that straps a bomb onto himself and goes into gets on a bus.
Yeah.
In Israel. Yeah, sure. He wants to make Allah happy or whatever, and you can say he's not evil. He's trying to. No. Wait a sec.
See, you're already using certain language. When I've defined as trying to understand a person, that doesn't take away from the conclusion of them being them doing an evil act or being evil or so forth.
No, I know. I'm saying that they're doing an evil act is separate from whether they are evil.
Something. the ultimate definition of whether someone's evil or not is God's.
Right.
Okay. I'm saying that like I'm not taking away, like you talk in terms of the Nazis. This argument seems to imply that somehow I'm being somewhat empathetic to the Nazis and so forth and so forth. What I'm saying is the Nazis' application of the principles that he had, which resulted in these conclusions, were evil. But I want to understand what those motivations were. If the motivation was, for example, let's give you an example. Ma Barker, right? Ma Barker, who loved her sons and really cried when her sons got arrested, right? She was a real mother figure. She really cared about her children. Motherhood, totally motherhood. Thing was that her motherhood basically said, and I'll kill anyone who gets in the way of my kids. Now, it's interesting. For example, you talk in terms of motherhood. Motherhood is perceived within halacha as a very, I don't like the word selfish, but a drive that comes from the self. Because mothers are very protective, right? And in certain ways, you've seen throughout history that mothers, when their children are being attacked, they're not thinking of anything else. They'll attack the people who are attacking their children. And it's motherhood, which is generally a good drive. But the fact is that if your motherhood lets you say, I'm going to protect my kids who are crooks, well, you know something? That kind of motherhood is not something I'm too, that doesn't mean that motherhood is a good drive. That motherhood has evil connotations to it. The point is as you look further into perspectives, as you begin to look further into issues, what I'm finding out is as people circle the wagons, they don't understand what's going on from the other side. And what happens is a breakdown of dialogue, but a breakdown of understanding of the full issues and understanding what a lot of the real motivations are. Not the motivations to basically say, oh, well, they have a good reason. The motivations are problematic also.
Right.
Okay?
So, for example, when a guy walks into a French nightclub and shoots a whole bunch of people, it's important to understand why he did it. In other words, what's driving him? He obviously recognizes he's not evil. He doesn't believe he's evil. And so he's getting a message from something that's saying you've got to go in and kill those heathens or whoever he believes they
Right.
are. And what's the fundamental reason? And unless you actually look and try to understand the reason, you're not going to be able to truly prevent that from happening later on.
But that's what I'm getting at. And also it does develop the conversation. See, what happens is, it's an interesting aspect of what happens in terms of religion. These arguments about belief become so dogmatic that they prevent any ability to have any type of dialogue. I tell a story. When I was working, it was my first position. I was a director of congregational activities at this large synagogue in Denver, Colorado, and there was a church group who came in to visit the synagogue, and they came in. They wanted a tour and so forth and so forth. And the way the synagogue was constructed was, as we were walking out, we had to walk down this long aisle. Okay? So we're walking down this long aisle. I was walking at the end, and the teacher of this group, and these kids were high school students, was at the front. And what occurred is a few of the high school students came back to me and basically confronted me, why don't I believe in Jesus, right? and they happened to quote a verse from Tanakh. It just so happened I knew that verse. I'm a rabbi. That doesn't mean I know Bible too well. I know a little more Talmud, but you know, I'll tell you another story about that in a sec. But the fact of the matter is, this verse I happen to know, and this was a verse about the second coming. And basically, the implication was the verse said something about 2 years or whatever, and these guys basically looked at me and said, "Blah blah 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 blah. Why don't you accept this?" About something. I said, "Well, that's very interesting. You're applying it to the second coming and so forth, but the verse does say 2 years. I think it's been a little bit longer than 2 years or whatever, something like that." And these guys basically said, "Yeah, but that's not what the verse means. It means this and this and this and this." And I said, "Really? So you're interpreting the verse? You have your interpretation. I can have my interpretation. What is your interpretation better than my interpretation? That's not what the verse says. So already forget the verse as an argument." And these kids were like, "Wow, you're right. You're right. Gee whiz. You know, I was told that this was the one understanding of the verse, but you're right. That's not what the verse says. And you're giving me, why? We're interpreting it." And basically got them checked out. At this point in time, the Sunday school teacher came to the back. They saw the people talking to the rabbi. So she comes to the back. So she's now walking down there. And what's her argument back? Not an argument. She's saying, "We believe in a God of love." That's all she kept saying. "We believe in a God of love. We believe in God of love." Not dealing with anything that I actually said. Okay, so that's her argument. But I made my point to the kids. But what I was really saying to the kids is, you know something? You're all caught up in this belief and faith and so forth and so forth. Think about it. And once you start doing that, and that's a great fear for a lot of religions. They don't want you to think. They don't want to hear questions. Right? And that's not just in other religions. You find it in terms of Judaism as well. Like I was talking to my Rabbi once, and but other people also. And it's interesting because I'm noted to ask questions, and so I'll get people coming to me and asking questions, and they're going to throw me this question that's going to blow away. This is a real tough question. So, they'll say, "Oh, that's an interesting question." But I'll tell you, it's actually stronger than I'll sit there and say, "The real problem is this and this and this on top of the question, and on top of the question." And then I show the real, further problems. And then I sit there and say, but wait a second. Okay? I'm an Orthodox rabbi. So understand that I still believe. So whether I get to answer all these questions, somehow these questions don't bother me to challenge what I'm accepting as true. And all of a sudden, like, whoa, right? So as I start developing the questions, I sort of go, but remember this, I'm not going to be, remember that I'm still believing, and it really changes the perspective. But the fact is understanding. But the truth is for so many people, they throw at the answer of belief. And that basically says it's belief, and you have to believe. And it allows questioning. But the fact is when you start laying down the foundation, you recognize that there are going to be issues and so forth. But one thing that then happens, I think, within Torah, is you don't necessarily always get the answers, but the fact that you're in the process is itself part of what Torah is about. Okay? So that gets you thinking. Just a little story about verses in Tanakh. We brought... okay, got to hear this one story. Okay, just because I really... You might have heard it already. We brought in an individual by the name of J. David Davis a few years ago, who is a Noahide minister in Athens, Tennessee. In the early 90s, he was written up in the Wall Street Journal and so forth and so forth. he was a Baptist minister, and he went up to the top of his church, took down the cross, and said, "We used to be Emmanuel Baptist Church. We're now just Emmanuel." And he became this Noahide minister, and he wrote a book, 7 Laws of Noah, I think his name was his book. Okay. Anyways, we, Nishma, and Jews for Judaism brought him in to speak. We had him speaking at Shar Shemayim. We had him speaking at the North York Library. Anyways, it was a really interesting weekend. Anyways, when we were at the North York Library, that was intended for non-Jews, specifically intended for non-Jews who wanted to find out about Noahism and stuff like that. Of course, a lot of Jews showed up anyway, but that was okay. But the fact is that at the end of the evening, there was one individual who was really interested, and he started talking to David, and they're going back and forth, and they're quoting verses from the Bible, from Tanakh, back and forth, and so forth and so forth. What does this mean? What does that mean? And I was standing to the side and watching it. So the guy that David's talking to, says, "Well, the rabbi's right there. Why don't we ask him what he thinks about these verses?" So David just looks at him. He's a rabbi. He doesn't know anything about biblical verses. Don't even go over there. And this guy is totally like, "What? Rabbi?" He looks at me. He says, "Is that true?" I said, "Yes, it is. The Judaism is not really a Bible. It's not really focused on the Bible. It's focused on Talmud and stuff like that. Obviously, with the exception of the Chumash being very much of a focus. But the truth is, how many rabbis really know the books of Nach?" But I always remember the way David just sort of just said, "He's a rabbi. What does he know about the Bible?" Anyways, that's why I was talking before about that situation. It just so happened I have to know that pasuk. Anyways, that's why I'm saying about why it's important not to entrench, not to circle the wagons, but to try and understand perspectives. And I hope you guys enjoyed this.